Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Brian, and welcome to episode 21 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. This episode, we're going to look at a bunch of different ways that Cisco is involved with the OpenStack project. And joining us today are Rick Clark and James Urquhart, two people that are intimately involved with those efforts. Guys, thanks for both of you being on the show today.
My pleasure, man.
For having us.
Thanks for coming. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves real quickly for anybody who isn't familiar with what you're doing, and give us some background on what you're working on at Cisco these days around OpenStack.
All right, I guess I'll go first here. My name is James Urquhart. I run cloud programs under Lou Tucker, who is the CTO of cloud computing for Cisco. And also I write a blog on CNET called The Wisdom of Clouds, and I've been sort of covering the cloud computing space, been in the cloud computing online world for quite some time as well. And I've been working very closely on our OpenStack projects of late.
Very cool. Rick, what about you?
Yeah, well, my name's Rick Clark. I work for Jesper in NMTG, the Network Management Technology Group, but I work very closely with Lou Tucker and his group, James included. I was the original project lead for the OpenStack project and one of the founders. I actually I came to Cisco Rackspace, and I went to Rackspace specifically to create OpenStack.
Okay, cool. So you were involved way back in the NASA days then?
Well, before NASA.
Oh, okay, very cool. Why don't we jump into this a little bit? James, Cisco made a formal announcement, kind of formal involvement with OpenStack back in the spring of this year, of 2011. Can you give us some background on why Cisco's getting involved with a big OpenStack project, and what's been happening in the company since that announcement?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And really, when we were looking at, what were the ways in which the network's role in cloud computing was going to be defined, and the ways in which then the value of the network would be made available first to services and ultimately to end users consuming the cloud, we had to ask ourselves some real serious questions about the ways in which these techniques, these approaches to networking were going to be defined. And it was really clear to us that really running code and loose consensus was going to sort of be an early definition. So some of the large cloud service providers that are out there today, Amazon and Rackspace and others, they had sort of a very, very simple view of the network that allowed them to do sort of, really large-scale applications like web applications, like big data, good enough. And there was some power there. But we were running into a lot of enterprises that had real concern about how they're going to handle, the wide variety of technologies and the wide variety of internal owners of different applications and services that they were going to have to run. And it was clear that there was a need for a little bit more capability in the network than was there. So how does that happen? How does the industry start to work out what that is? And open source really seemed like the way that if a standard, a de facto standard, were to come out about sort of a more sophisticated level of networking, that standard would come from the open source community. At the time, OpenStack, and through this year, at this point in time, OpenStack really has drawn the largest community in the marketplace, the largest community in terms of the capabilities that they bring to the market. There's sort of this growing community and growing sophistication to the way that the platform works, and that's really what drew us there. So we decided that we wanted to be a participant in the network services side of OpenStack, and that was just spinning up. Other companies involved included Nicira, Citrix, NTT was heavily involved in it, and there are a number of other companies that have come in and made contributions since then. And that's really what our focus has been on, first of all, making sure that we can demonstrate OpenStack running on Cisco UCS, running with Cisco Nexus and Catalyst equipment, but also, in addition to that, to really making sure that we help the network services in OpenStack become very, very capable of delivering what needs to be delivered to really expand the role of the network from where it is today.
Okay, so it's not really there to go define new standards like maybe what's going on in the IETF or something. It's really about saying, how do we make sure there's some really good thought around operational models, maybe broader scale or segmentation. Like, this isn't a standards effort. This is a let's make sure that a bunch of different ways of looking at what the network can bring is going to be there for the OpenStack community.
Yeah, it's more allowing the market to define what the best practices, techniques around networking are, as opposed to a standards body sitting down and dictating that this is the architecture that we believe everyone should use.
Okay.
There are certain things we think the standards bodies will present that will be critical around certain levels of interoperability and other things that there are some really good efforts that are going underway. But we thought just in terms of the basics and finding, experimenting and finding the right architectures and finding the right features, that we really thought that the market itself would do it, but that the open source community was going to be one of the most influential factors.
Okay.
If I can add something,
sure, absolutely. Another
reason that we're involved is that our customers are wanting to run OpenStack, and
right.
we want to, and we want to make sure that we help OpenStack have the quality that our customers expect when they're running things on Cisco hardware. So a big part of what we did during this release in OpenStack is help with testing.
Okay.
So we're not just adding support for Cisco hardware and support for virtual networking. We're also making OpenStack a more stable, solid platform.
Okay, so it's more than just making sure you can push sort of Cisco branded equipment. It's about quality. It's about having a vehicle to take customer feedback and sort of directly put it into something that you can prove works and so forth.
Exactly.
Now, who do you guys are obviously deeply involved with this. Anytime you're involved with early stuff, you tend to be the ones who are sort of directly engaging with customers. Without getting into names, what types of problems, industries, applications. What are the early customers trying to do with OpenStack that maybe they weren't trying to do with some other type of cloud management model or even cloud computing model?
I think that we're seeing a lot of interest, and I don't know that this is different from any other cloud model or cloud computing product, but we're seeing a lot of interest from service providers that know that they need to start up something as a service provider, some sort of public cloud service.
Okay.
We're also seeing a lot of interest from different government agencies that have computing needs.
Okay.
I would say, and in addition to that, I would say one of the really interesting things that's going on with OpenStack that may be a little different from our other offerings is, to Rick's point, right? I mean, I think there's when you talk to the service provider community, in a lot of ways, there's sort of different ecosystems within the service provider community, much like there is in the rest of the enterprise market per se. And so you're seeing different, people who want to be parts of different ecosystems go after different technologies. So we are extremely successful, in terms of doing our VMware stuff, and I'm sure that sort of VMware is very successul doing the VMware stuff, as is other people in the market that are doing that. This is not sort of to replace anything that's going on in the market already. It is, though, for the community of people who are really kind of looking at open source as the way to have more flexibility and a different cost structure around the way that they're delivering the technology that they want to do, and perhaps have more influence on the future direction in terms of scale, in terms of feature sets that the underlying platform takes. It's a very interesting option. And one of the areas of the market that surprised me a lot is folks that are trying to sort of respond to things that are going on in the market already. So things like iCloud, things like what Amazon has done, things like, what they're looking to do is not just repeat what those companies have done, but to find ways to differentiate and maybe do something to go above and beyond. And those companies, I think, tend to feel that they can do a little bit more with open source to do that, to build out a competitive system than they could perhaps do with somebody else's commercial system.
Okay. So it feels like it's being driven maybe more by choice, either choice from the provider saying, I either want to differentiate or I want to make sure that those customers that want to work with me have that as an option, even if they may offer something else in parallel. And it's enterprises saying, maybe the choice is around pricing, maybe the choice is around being able to do unique things for their industry or their business. It's okay.
And in part, it's around companies that look and they say, look, we're much more comfortable acquiring our tools through an open model, an open source model, rather than a partner system belonging to one of the other vendors that we use. Which and believe me, there are plenty of companies that still say, I like Microsoft, I like VMware. I can get what I need from them or their ecosystem. So for them, it's much more comfortable to get sort of a supported, tested, fully integrated product and utility set, the tool set. Whereas OpenStack's not quite there yet, right? OpenStack, the thing about OpenStack is it is very much an early stage open source project. So it is very much about wanting to get your hands dirty with the technology as of today.
Now, Rick, you've obviously been involved with this thing since well before it sort of got formalized and so forth. Some of the talk in the news this week, because the release that came out this week, it's called Diablo, obviously sort of the fourth iteration, fourth generation, fourth version. You're starting to see some people say, well, maybe this is because of some of the new stuff that's in there. There's sort of a portal, management interface. There's some things around network. There's some more robust things about authentication and so forth. People are starting to say maybe this is kind of that first release where it starts to get over that hump. You've been involved with it for a long time. Does it feel like this is sort of at that stage where people are going to start going, it doesn't feel like I need to literally be a rocket scientist to make this work, or where are we at in the evolution of this?
So I'd say we're near the top of that hill.
Okay.
I think that there's been a lot of work putting features in and trying to make sure that there's the correct feature set that people want to deploy. I think that probably over the next release we'll see a lot of stabilization. I think we'll see that very quickly over the next few months. Things very quickly stabilize and just have a very nice, stable platform to build on.
The community as a whole has been keeping pretty close to the schedules they've been laying out, right? I mean, it's pretty much basically every 6 months or so there's a new release.
Yes, exactly. There is the basic tenet around the releases is that they do time-based releases in OpenStack. Every 6 months they release. Whatever is ready goes into the release. Whatever is not is held back for the next release.
I mean, that's a good thing. It's going to give customers a level of comfort of, okay, I have some visibility into what to plan for, what I can not plan for, and so forth. And that's obviously a good thing.
Right, and I think the interesting thing too is that the way that the way the community decides what features to work on for the next 6 months as well is pretty open and in the public as well. So we have a summit coming up in Boston. There will be information up online for most of the stuff that we discuss at that summit. There will be decisions that will then be communicated back through the community site to describe what's going on. And I think that one of the things that's really powerful is if you have an idea, you can submit that idea for the community to review. To give you feedback on that. It may get maybe similar and overlap somebody else's idea. It may solve a problem that certain people didn't think that they had or didn't know that they had. But ultimately, if it's an idea that's worthy of attention, it will it will move through the process of becoming something. Ultimately, it has to find somebody who's willing to develop it or a group of people willing to develop it. But that process has worked pretty well to the scale that the project's gotten to this point. And I'm sure there'll be tweaks to that process. But I think that's one of the things we like is that, when we come as Cisco, we don't either have to sort of dictate the future nor do we have to sort of sit back and follow somebody else's lead. We have an opportunity to have a real honest dialogue with even our competitors to talk about what is it that the end user really needs from OpenStack and where is it that we enable the vendors to allow their value to shine through. And I think that that's why one of the reasons why OpenStack is really valuable to us is that we're able to be an equal member in the community, take leadership, in terms of just project leadership where it makes sense for us to do that, and to assist others where it makes sense to do that.
Okay, very cool. Diablo's obviously a big deal for Cisco because it shows the community. It's it's the first major release, a real release where you've contributed code. It's the first time network as a project, a sub area has its own focus area. Before it was sort of really basic connectivity. Talk a little bit about what's going on in that network space of OpenStack. I think the first sort of iteration is called Quantum. Is that right?
Let me start with the first piece of that real quick and kind of just lay out what's going on with networking in OpenStack as simply as possible. So There is a basic level of networking that's been in the Nova project, which is the compute service that is part of OpenStack. Was the original code was contributed from NASA. And so there's some real basic connectivity in terms of, flat network, DHCP or fixed IP addressing, and then some very simplistic VLAN capability. What's going on initially here is we've established a layer 2 abstraction, a layer 2 network service capability, which essentially allows us to replicate a lot of what's in Nova, but to do it in a way that vendors can now be able to map that basic abstraction into their technologies in whatever they see as the most optimal way to deliver that service, right? So that's actually really important because there may not be, there are already, 2 sets of technology just at that. There's a technology for the Open vSwitch environment that allows you to deliver that capability. There's a technology for several Cisco lines that we contributed as well. Okay. We expect more from other vendors to come downstream. Now, there's also what we're talking about moving forward with the X6 release. Then is we have to add some capability around L3 and around connectivity between L2 network segments, right? So both service insertion becomes really important, and also bridging or whatever technologies you want to use in terms of connecting network segments together. So that's one area. Those are one big area of focus that are coming. There's also some increased capability for around monitoring, and there's a pretty long list. We can probably add a little bit to that we're looking at in terms of broadening the story beyond sort of that basic L2 connectivity. What will really kind of matter is what resources come to bear, how quickly do we align on a solution for each of the areas that we're looking at, and do we have both the time and the resources to put the work together before the Essex release train leaves. And so it will be a number of weeks as we go through the summit and as we go through some planning post-summit before we really understand what the target release set is for the Essex release. But we're building from this very first step, which is experimental officially, by the way. So It's in Diablo, but it's an experimental release. Okay. And to solidify it to a full production release service, as well as to add, begin to broaden the capability from where we are today. Okay. So, Rick, did you want to add anything else to that? Because I know there might be some features and things I missed.
So, no, I think you did a great job. I think that the next thing is starting to look at the top-level orchestration, and that's the container service. And the end goal is that there are a whole bunch of applications that you kind of mentioned at the beginning, James, don't fit into what people are doing with cloud now. People are they're very good at being able to deploy web-scale apps, these basic web applications, but there are all sorts of enterprise applications that won't, and understanding the requirements of those applications and being able to package them and actually deploy them in the cloud is one of the long-term goals of a container project.
So, and what's the name of the container project?
Danabe.
Okay, so the container project. So we've got Quantum today, which is experimental in the Diablo release.
That's correct.
Then the container project, which is still being scoped and defined and figured out what might or may not go in the next release. That release being Essex, the E release, which would be like a springtime 2012 roughly time frame, right? If we're on that same schedule.
That's correct.
Okay. So what's the model? I'm just trying to sort of think logistically or operationally. So you've got Diablo, which has some parts that are considered, GA, I guess, in certain terminologies, and then you've got a portion like Quantum, which is considered experimental. If you're a customer, what do you expect out of the community, or what's the process by which you would go? When do I know that maybe that becomes considered more of a supported sort of sub-project?
Well, you're missing two things. One is support. So right now, I don't think you can call any of it supported unless someone is going to fix bugs and commit to fixing bugs in the last version. It's not officially supported. So I don't.
So it's not supported supported like you might expect from something like Red Hat that they do around Linux.
So but now something becoming an official part of OpenStack, like when would Quantum? There'd be an official announcement. It would be on target to be the next release, the Essex release. I would expect. for it to be going into OpenStack proper.
At least the layer 2, right? It depends how we define where layer 3 fits in. It depends how we decide where other elements fit into the picture. But at least the existing quantum L2 stuff will probably make the Essex release as a official service. If it succeeds at not being too buggy, and the testing is it's been fully tested, and so we expect it to do that. What the question mark will be, if we do other services like Danabe, if we do it L3 as a separate service as opposed to as a part of the L2 service, there's a bunch of other questions that are still up in the air. That means that some of this other stuff may show up as experimental first separately. But I think you can expect for sure that some elements of the networking stack will be more formally a part of the Essex release.
Okay. Let's step back for a second. So you talked about a little bit of sort of network services, which would be things like firewalls and load balancers and maybe IPS or things that might be considered level layer 4 through 7. You talked about this concept of a container. How do those things fit together? What's a container? What's a container trying to do?
So a container is a higher level abstraction. So let's say you have a lot of network segments and you have a bunch of VMs. You need to put some of those VM instances on some of the network segments. A container could be nested. You could have a compute container that contains all of your VMs, and then the instructions of where they fit into your container that contains all of your networking segments.
Okay. So it's a little bit.
Then you can name those things, and you can say deploy Bob, which is my application that I've abstracted.
Okay. Right, and I think it becomes a unit of management. It becomes a unit of packaging. You can have nested containers, so you can have predefined network containers, say, for instance, that define a certain configuration of a network for, say, a 3-tier application or a HIPAA-compliant application or something that you could then include in your application definition. One thing that people don't really realize about the way that Nova, Swift, and everything is designed is there's really not the concept of sets of things. They're really about manipulating, for the most part today, they're about manipulating individual things. So Nova, for instance, is about sort of configuring and managing VMs sort of one at a time. So there's a big need in the OpenStack community to begin to broaden out the concept of how you group things together. And you could do things like, the compute service has a compute cluster and the storage service has a way of sort of, of cloning buckets of things or things like that. And I think that there's some value in those services individually, but when it comes to actually deploying an application environment, I think the community recognized pretty quickly, and we certainly recognized for some time, that you really need something that's a little bit more integrated, a little bit more consolidated to define how the pieces and parts fit together. How is that cluster distributed across a network segment or across multiple network segments? How are VMs that are different images related to each other, right? Like a front end GUI VM image versus a business logic image. So I think in a lot of ways that's really what we're trying to get to, is an abstraction that's we call it a container because it is an abstraction that can be used at an application level, but it can also be used for subsets of things within an application. And so it's meant to be this sort of very hierarchical, recursive kind of concept that can be used in several ways.
Okay, so if you're kind of mapping it back to a business problem, the same way that in a lot of cases we will say, this is sort of a gold, silver, or bronze service, which tends to have certain either definitions or implications about, say, security or high availability or bandwidth or whatever. In theory, you could take these containers which have certain definitions within them, certain characteristics that might be a network topology, a security insertion point, a monitoring, and you could start to think about how do I package those together, or at least bring them together in a way that you go, I'm going to automate the compute portion a certain way, I'm going to have these containers that are going to be storage containers, network containers, compute containers, some combination, and you're going to give people creating services a more robust way of thinking about them without having to step through every single piece of that. Is that kind of where
that's
the
exactly
going?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I expect that if you look at all of those things, the security, the storage, the compute, the network, they're all just requirements of an application. And so what we want is a way to package up all the requirements of an application and a way to abstract that after you've deployed it.
Okay. Obviously, for a little while there, networking, just in general, not necessarily in OpenStack, but network kind of wasn't talked about a whole lot. It was just there. And over the last, 12 months or so, it's kind of gotten back to becoming an interesting topic because you have things like people debating layer 2 versus layer 3 architectures. You've got people debating these various kinds of VLAN mobility stuff. You've got very new architectures like OpenFlow. Does it feel like what's being started with, say, Quantum and eventually with Denabi? Does this feel like the way that the community will sort of come together for any of those things, or does it feel like they'll be separate? Is it too early in the day to figure out kind of where all this networking stuff will go within OpenStack?
I think we hope it'll all come together under Denabi and Quantum. I think that's the plan. The thing is, when you're dealing with an open source community, you have influence but not control.
Sure.
So I think that we will do our best to put our muscle behind our mouths and do some of the work to make sure that it turns out we want it to turn out.
Okay. Right. And for customers, that's the beauty of them looking at these open source projects is if they decide they really love something else, there's the chance that may be available to them too, right?
Yeah, and in the end, what people want is what's going to go in. If people want it, it'll end up in there.
Okay.
Right, and I think that's one of the things that it's an interesting little kind of paradox there, which is when it comes to then supporting specific hardware, right? Mm-hmm. So it comes to the situation of understanding that there are capabilities that are available that OpenStack should not control. In terms of how it operates, and which may or may not be hidden through the abstraction from the end user. I think that's the point where it gets, where it gets a little interesting in terms of customers asking for features versus the ability to deliver them. Because there are some features that are very, very hard to deliver, or there are some network configuration capabilities that are very, very hard to do if you don't have coordination between the actual infrastructure and the infrastructure management system, like OpenStack. So in some ways, it also depends a little bit on the vendors coming to the table and joining the projects. The good news is that we've seen some pretty big name vendors out there in the networking space already declare themselves as members of the OpenStack community. We'd like to see them step up and also then provide capability that works with Quantum, works with Diablo, or with Denabi and other services as they appear, and also to help us in terms of the definition of these environments. Because again, the better the community is put together, the more we're looking at sort of the use cases from the perspective of the end users trying to consume these systems and how we can deliver against that. The more selection that the end user has in return, right? So, I'd certainly put a call out well that it's not just about the user saying these are the features that we want in OpenStack, but it's also the vendors coming to the table and saying these are the capabilities we're going to make the enablement we're going to give OpenStack to meet that demand.
Okay. Without going into the details, I assume one of the things you talked about was there will be, obviously, as part of the contributions Cisco's made, there will probably be some ways to have linkage to, say, the network, the Nexus platforms, the Catalyst platforms. Will there be a place on the Cisco website where there'll be a listing of the ways you can interconnect OpenStack from a management framework perspective to Cisco equipment or what's been tested or sample configurations?
Sure. So we have some existing tech notes out there today, and certainly can provide you the URL for the notes for that.
Yeah, we can always put it in the show notes.
Okay. In the show notes, but what we've done is we've actually installed OpenStack on UCS B series and C series compute environments. We are now working on some additional work to demonstrate UCS working on our our large-scale cloud architecture. So, we call our VMDC architecture. We're doing some work to demo, just a tech note to say this is how you would install it in this environment, so you can play with it. But in the long term, we understand our customers want more capability. So we have a website that we are working on, trying to get up in the first week of October if we can, but soon after if we can't. That will be a much more detailed description of what OpenStack, what Cisco is doing with OpenStack, what we're contributing specifically, and also then what support for Cisco equipment we've tested with the OpenStack community. So that will be, when that site's up and running, the best place to come to, and again, that will be something that we'll make very public when it's available.
Okay, good. So I'm going to throw one last question out here for either one of you guys and maybe both of you. So traditionally when people think of Cisco, the phrase open source doesn't usually come to mind. But over the last couple of years, there's been a number of people and even groups that people have come to Cisco. You guys obviously, Lou Tucker has a huge background around a lot of the open source things that were going on previously. It feels like maybe there's a set of DNA that's growing within the company. So, I mean, from your guys' perspective, how do you see internally things changing to look at open source differently, or how's the company, kind of viewing things like OpenStack as an open source project as being part of their strategy?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the modern software world at all levels of software, from end applications to infrastructure, has been strongly influenced by the open source model, and again, I think it to a certain extent it comes down to ecosystems. So what Cisco as a company understands and is growing to learn how to do is that open source communities are a phenomenal way to both to learn about and to influence. But I don't even think the influence is the most critical thing. It's really about this is what the customers want, and we need to give the ability that Cisco's strong innovation and strong technology capabilities in the networking area, in growing in the server and compute space, converged infrastructure, and even communications, collaboration, and other sort of application level things are actually brought to that community, into that ecosystem, in a way that is really beneficial to both Cisco and the community. And so participating in open source is a must, right? It's absolutely. I don't think you can not participate in open source at some level and be able to walk away with what you could declare as an open system, as a system, an interoperable system, a system that works with other vendors' tools in the future. So on top of that, we really think that the OpenStack community is putting together, a pretty good system, a pretty powerful system over time. And so part of what we're doing, what we see with the open source world, is a way for us to also, be able to gain capability that we can take advantage of to make system solutions for our customers that are both very open and very interoperable, and at the same time, really allow for both Cisco and for our customers to differentiate with that environment as well. So now there's other areas where open source are becoming increasingly important to Cisco as well. There's projects like the OpenFlow project where we're looking at new software-defined networking capabilities that may actually really change the way networking is controlled and managed. We're looking at new management tools and environments that are from open source communities.
Can I add to this? Before we get too far down? So I think that I want to make sure that I say that you can mean two things by your question, Brian. Mm-hmm. There's how does Cisco feel about the open source licensing model for their business? Are they comfortable with that? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we're that's where the industry is going. That's something that we have to accept. I think that's accepted at Cisco. The other bit is about open source is not really technically about the license. It's the collaborative, distributed model of development. And that is a cultural thing that we have to participate in and sort of accept. And I think that there are going to be some road bumps along the way, but that Cisco is trying and is going to participate very actively and openly in those communities in that distributed development.
Yeah.
No, that's perfectly said. It's much more articulate than what I was saying. Yeah. Well, you see a lot more from us.
Yeah, it feels like something that every large company with any sort of legacy is going to have to deal with. And I think that in a lot of circles, the general consensus is that while things like IETF or IEEE or whatever are still there to kind of write the paper standards, the real standards, at least for cloud computing, are kind of get defined in the open source community. So if you want to be part of that, whether it's because you want to meet your customers' demand or you feel like that's where you can drive innovation, it feels like you have to be in that space. And how comfortable you get and how fast you get there is going to dictate in a lot of cases how successful you are in the market. So it's good to see it happening and changing, and like you guys said, it's you're trying to drive some of those new cultural things across the company, which is excellent. Well, guys, listen. Thank you very much for your time today. We're sort of hitting that point where I think people will stop being interested in listening. I assume, I'm going to guess, both of you will be at parts of the OpenStack conference in Boston. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So for anybody who's listening, if you see James and Rick, buy them a beer. And where else can they find you guys, either out on the web or at the conferences in the next couple of months?
Go ahead, Rick.
I'll be at the Ubuntu Developer Summit that's coming up, and I'm planning on going to the Cloud Expo in Hong Kong as well.
James, what about you?
Yeah, I'm always can be found on the CNET on the Wisdom of Clouds blog that's up there, and I am also going to be speaking on the Monday of the summit. I'll actually be in New York at Interop New York, and also I'm doing a presentation on the 29th on the Virtual Cloud Connect conference, which anybody can get to online, where I'll be talking about the effect of cloud computing on the future of networking.
Very cool.
Well, guys, we're out of time. For anybody listening, you can follow us on Twitter at thecloudcast.net or reach us on thecloudcast.net on the web. You'll find links to the show and show notes. You can leave us a comment, send us an email, or you can find details on how to stream us on Stitcher. So for James and Rick, guys, thank you very much for your time, and for everybody else, thanks for listening.